I'm Jason Epperson. This is RV Miles, and it's time for the latest in RV and camping news. Welcome back, everybody. This week, some overblown, perhaps, stories about Canadian snowbirds finding it much harder to visit the US, 4,000 campsites in California closing, plus a lot more national park fallout from budget cuts and staffing issues, and the RV industry sees sales declining even as it ramps up production. We'll get to all that in a moment, but first, a message from the sponsor of today's video, eTrailer.com. If you're getting a new vehicle this year, you're going to want to check out eTrailer.com and their new fitment guides for 2025 vehicles. eTrailer's expert guides help you answer questions like, will my old roof rack work with my new ride? Or how do I make sure I'm ready to tow right away? Transitioning to a new vehicle shouldn't mean starting over with your gear. That's why eTrailer's ready with 2025 fits for the products you know and trust. Their team of enthusiasts has done the work test fitting your favorite products on 2025 vehicles and creating detailed content to show exactly how it all works. With tailored solutions and real-world insights, they're here to make sure your next adventure starts smoothly. So whether you're already driving your 2025 vehicle or planning ahead, eTrailer's here with the gear, advice, and confidence you need to hit the road without hesitation. Visit the link in the description to head directly to eTrailer's Vehicle Finder to find custom fit accessories for your specific vehicle and more. Okay, first up, I'd like to take a minute to correct a couple of seemingly big stories out there that might not be as big of a deal as people are making out of them. It's been widely reported that it will be harder for Canadians to enter the US thanks to a recent illegal immigration-oriented executive order from President Donald Trump. This is particularly centered around the snowbird community, but of course it would affect other visitors as well. These requirements were published on the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, website, and they're part of Trump's Protecting the American People Against Invasion executive order, which was signed on January 20th. It applies to anyone who isn't a permanent resident, including Canadian citizens, of course. So this new post was put up on the USCIS website that's prompted a lot of articles I've been seeing out there saying things like, Canadians now need a visa, Canadians will need to be fingerprinted to come into the US now, or that they'll need to carry papers, etc. Canadian citizens have enjoyed visa exemption in the US, and they haven't really been required to do much other than show their passport and declare how long they'll be in the US. The post that was put up on the website says that with limited exceptions, all aliens 14 years of age or older who are not fingerprinted or registered when applying for a US visa and who remain in the United States for longer than 30 days must apply for registration and fingerprinting. Once an alien has registered and appeared for fingerprinting, unless waived, the Department of Homeland Security will issue evidence of registration, which aliens over the age of 18 must carry and keep in their possession at all times. And this is what has people up in arms. All of that, though, is really nothing new, actually. It's from the Immigration and Nationality Act, which dates back to 1965. So what's changed? Well, at least as far as this goes, not a whole lot. No, Canadians don't need a visa, and they don't need to be fingerprinted or to pre-register to come into the United States. If you read on, the post states that most aliens in the United States have already registered as required by law. For Canadians, that's because, as the post later states, aliens admitted into the United States as non-immigrants who were issued Form I-94, even if the period of admission has expired, have already registered. When a Canadian citizen crosses the border into the US, that's done automatically, either as part of their pre-flight registration for air travel or at the border when they cross. It's an electronic form that's generated for you. There are some aliens present in the US, including surely some Canadians who don't have the form filed for whatever reason. Those folks will need to register, which will involve getting fingerprinted and such, but this should be a very small of people to my understanding. The Canadian Snowbird Association has been following this closely, and they say that Canadians are advised to check to see if they were issued an electronic I-94 upon entry into the US. That can be done by visiting i94.cpb.dhs.gov. I'll link to it in the description. If an I-94 form has not been found, they advise that you register with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services through the new registration portal that's being created for this purpose. However, that portal is not yet active or available yet. So once again, this really shouldn't change anything for snowbirds or any other Canadians entering the US in the normal way they always have. The next big story that's kind of created a bit of a panic among some was a New York Times story that makes it seem like 4,000 campsites in national forests in the state of California are on the brink of closing for this summer. Again, these are federal sites, not California ran sites. These are federal sites under the U.S. Forest Service. The New York Times got their eyes on an internal U.S. Forest Service spreadsheet that lists 4,000 campsites across many of California's 18 national forests that could close for part or all of the summer season due to budget freezes, staffing shortages, and stalled contracts for basic services like pumping toilets. The article says that an internal email from the Forest Service on February 18th instructs staffers to list public facilities that could close this year as a result of budget cuts and shortages. The email noted that, quote, unforeseen impacts and change conditions, as well as financial limitations, may render some sites unsafe or too challenging to open to full capacity in 2025. It was sent less than a week after at least 2,000 employees were terminated by the Department of Government Efficiency on Valentine's Day. So this is one of those things where the New York Times reports something, and actually their article seemed pretty in-depth and took a coherent look at the budgetary struggles in the situation. But then dozens upon dozens of other news outlets took snippets of the story, wrote their own articles linking back to the New York Times, which of course is behind the paywall. So people are reading sort of this distilled version of this story. And most of those stories has some pretty inflammatory headlines. So no, 4,000 campsites are not closing this summer. However, there is a struggle and we could see some issues. Perhaps some campgrounds, it's very possible, could close. These are sites that are at risk potentially. Some of them seriously at risk. The New York Times report says that at least 3 visitor centers in the El Dorado National Forest, which borders the Lake Tahoe region, could close because of low staffing, including the loss of all administrative staff at the district office. At 6 Rivers National Forest in Northern California, 4 of the 5 front desk staff members were fired, while the Trump administration has approved temporary seasonal hires for the National Park Service after firing roughly 1,000 probationary employees. The Forest Service, which manages more than twice the amount of land as the National Park Service, has not been approved to expand hiring, and frankly, they were probably more short-staffed than the National Park Service was prior to any of this. And looking towards the National Park Service, we are seeing more and more cuts to hours and services at national parks. Sequoia and Kings Canyon are rotating closure days at their 3 visitor centers, and they've canceled all ranger programs until further notice. Hot Springs National Park announced the visitor center and museum will be closed on Tuesdays and Wednesdays until further notice. We're seeing news like that popping up around the park system, as we've reported on the last couple episodes about. The Trump administration has also suspended normal spending authority. Government credit cards have been essentially shut off, except for 1 card per region. There are 12 regions in the National Park Service, and only 1 person in each region can now go run to a hardware store or something with a credit card. The Department of Government Efficiency has also proposed canceling the leases for more than 30 Park Service buildings that house visitor centers, museums, and other park facilities, including the New Orleans Jazz National Historic Park Visitor Center, the Mississippi National River Visitor Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the Klondike Gold Rush Visitor Center in Seattle. And now a government shutdown could be coming on Friday if Congress doesn't get things worked out, which would certainly affect park visitation in some way, but in what way, we don't really know yet how this administration will handle a shutdown when it comes to national parks. And apparently this is all coming on the heels of the busiest year in the history of the national park system. Normally, sometime in January or February, we get a press release from the National Park Service touting the previous year's visitation numbers. Not this year. This year's visitation report was buried deep on NPS.gov, which makes sense, I suppose. You probably don't want to announce record visitation while you're cutting staff. National park visitation was up 2% over 2023, and it is the busiest year since the National Park Service 100th anniversary in 2016. And 55% of parks experienced an above average number of visits in February to June and October to December, months outside of the typically heavy summer months. Golden Gate National Recreation Area once again topped the list as the most visited site in the country, followed by the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Gateway National Recreation Area, the Lincoln Memorial, Gulf Islands National Seashore, the Natchez Trace Parkway, the George Washington Memorial Parkway, Lake Mead National Recreation Area, and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Turning to the RV industry, we recently reported that RV manufacturing continues to slowly ramp up from the worst lows of the post-COVID RV manufacturing crash. But sales don't seem to be improving. Statistical Surveys Inc., who tracks state registrations of new RVs, so essentially the number of RVs actually sold, has released its January numbers, showing 17,543 retail registrations, which is a 6.5% decrease from January of 2024. Meanwhile, the RV Industry Association reported that 27,629 units were built in January, over a 10,000 unit difference. A lot of this has to do with sort of the overbuilding of units toward the end of the pandemic, and then an underbuilding of them in late 2023 to 2024. And now it's getting inventory back up, but also the right inventory, because people are buying different types of units now. Travel trailers and fifth wheels are gaining ground, while motorhome sales are declining at a faster rate. Finally, if you're camping Thursday night, March 13th, or even if you're not, be prepared to look up. The first total lunar eclipse in over 2 years will be visible across North America. Unfortunately, it's in the middle of the night this time around. Totality will last 66 minutes beginning at 2:59 a.m. Eastern, so technically Friday the 14th. A partial eclipse will begin at 1:09 a.m. That's it for this week's RV and camping news roundup. If you got something out of this video, hit the like button. If you want more like it, subscribe. And if you want to become a mile marker member or a paid support community, you get extra podcasts, you get a live stream. We're doing a live stream tonight every month from Abby and I, and a whole lot more. Consider joining. There's information in the description. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.